see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and today I'm here with Art Markman, and Art is a cognitive scientist from the University of Texas and a professor of psychology and marketing. So thank you very much, Art, for joining me today to talk about empathy.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So you're at the University of Texas, which happens to be my alma mater.
What is it? I did not know that.
Yeah, I studied economics there in the 80s, early 80s. So good to...
Well, it has changed a bit.
It has changed?
A little bit since the 80s.
Yeah. That's kind of the nature of life is change.
That's right.
So let's see, you also have a book out. Let's see, I have your Facebook page up here, your University of Texas page, and then your Facebook page, and you have your book, Smart Thinking. Let's see, the 3 essential keys to solve problems, innovate, and get things done.
Yeah. That's right. Book came out in January, and that's really focused on trying to help people think more effectively. The shorthand on that one is that we ask almost everyone we know to think for a living, and then we don't really teach them very much about the way their minds work. And you know, we wouldn't want to let somebody build a bridge without learning any physics, or practice medicine without learning any biology. But somehow it seems okay to set people loose on the world to think, and then not really give them much information about the mind.
The way that I found out, you know, kind of got connected with you was an article that you'd written, and it was called "Why Empathy Makes You More Helpful." So could you kind of go through that article and just review what it is that you wrote about there? Sure.
So my aim when I write blog entries really is to try and find interesting things from the science of psychology, from cognitive science broadly, to try and help people understand a little bit more about themselves. And this work on empathy was really fascinating because lots of us have the capacity, to a greater or lesser degree, to really feel someone else's feelings and to really put themselves in someone else's place. And we could ask why it is that we have this capacity to begin with. What value does it seem to have for us? And one of those values is that it's been known for quite a while that the more that we can empathize with other people, the more likely we seem to be to want to help them out. And so there's definitely a relationship between empathizing and your willingness to be helpful. And then the question becomes, well, why does that happen? What changes does empathy bring about in a person that makes them want to be more helpful? And what I found really interesting in the article that I was reading, that I tried to bring out in the blog entry, is that empathy seems to change our motivation and to influence why it is that we like to be helpful. So if you think about being helpful to other people, there are often 2 reasons why we would do that. So sometimes it's because intrinsically, as a part of who we are, we just think that being helpful is an important thing. And then there are times where we're helpful to other people because we believe that it's the right thing to do in that circumstance externally. Society's going to tell us it's the right thing to do, or somebody's watching us, and so we feel like we need to be helpful. And so those 2 motivations often drive our willingness to help others. And what empathy seems to do is to shift the balance for us more in the direction of helping because we believe internally that being helpful is the thing that defines us. And so there are 2 things that happen in this study that were interesting. The first is that people who as a trait seem to be more empathic are also people who believe that helping others is something that is internally an important part of themselves. And if that were it alone, it would just mean that there was this interesting facet of people who have empathy that they also internally believe they should help others. But the thing I found most fascinating about this is that if you manipulate people's likelihood of feeling empathy by really forcing them to think about other people's feelings, you actually, at the same time, increase their motivation internally to be helpful to others. So that's a very hopeful kind of message, because what it suggests is that the more that we put people in situations in which we force them to walk in other people's shoes, in which we really get them to understand what other people are feeling, that it's actually going to drive them more towards feeling like they need to be helpful as a part of who they are, rather than just because society might tell us we ought to be helpful. And that's the thing I found most fascinating about that research.
Yeah, it's about the motivations then. It's like, are you being motivated out of maybe fear or judgment or kind of external, kind of the stick approach, versus are you doing it because there's some kind of a, you know, a feeling that comes from you that you're wanting to do it. And then you're saying that if we just empathize, we're kind of creating structures, systems, situations where we're deepening our empathy, is we automatically kind of intrinsically want to contribute to the well-being of others.
That's right. That's right. So empathy has this powerful influence on the nature of our motivation. And I should add that the other thing that we know from lots of other research is that the kinds of things that are internally driven are the kinds of behaviors that we tend to perform most often. So, we know this, in school situations, people who are intrinsically motivated to learn are the ones who go out of their way to learn new information. They end up acting in smarter ways. They end up being more effective in whatever it is that they take on in life, because it's intrinsically motivated, not something that they're doing from the outside. And the same thing is going to be true in helping behavior. The people who are intrinsically motivated to be helpful are going to be the ones who are going to find situations to help other people. They're going to respond most quickly in situations where it's clear that someone needs help. Whereas those people who are extrinsically motivated to help, they're the ones who are going to kind of look around the room and figure out, is anybody watching me? Is this a situation where I need to be helpful? And only then are they going to step forward to do something. So from a standpoint of creating, a culture and a society of people who are going to be more helpful to each other, we really want to push people in the direction of feeling like intrinsically, I am the sort of person who wants to be helpful to others.
Well, you're using the word helpful, and in a lot of ways, helpful, you kind of think of, well, there's someone, on the streets, they're needing help, or there's this sense of that someone is in need of help, right? And that they're down and out or whatever. But there's also kind of this aspect of empathy where you just want people's well-being. So it's like, if I see you being creative, it's like, when I empathize with your creativity, I want to raise your, double your level of creativity. You know what I mean? So it's not always this sense of this is the part that kind of interests me, is that, and you've written, that's what you're writing about and studying, is kind of like motivations and how do people solve problems. And so it seems to me that the empathy is bigger than just this notion of helping people who are kind of like down and out, and that's,
I think that's right. Actually, when I say helpful, I really mean helpful broadly. I think you're right. When you hear the word helpful, the first thing you think of is, oh, there's this poor person on the street, or there's someone who's hungry, or and I need to help them in that way. But educators are helping people. The people who go out of their way to become educators in life are the ones who just feel the need to help other people understand themselves, help people to understand new material, help people to achieve the greatest heights that they can. So it's not just helping, isn't just, you know, giving a hand to the people who are somehow worse off than you are. Helping is also what we do to allow everyone to achieve their potential. I mean, I view myself as an educator, as someone who spends a lot of time helping other people, largely to achieve whatever it is that they're hoping to achieve. And, you know, in a lot of ways, I mean, you know, I write blog entries for Psychology Today and Huffington Post and Harvard Business Review and all of these other places, not for my own benefit per se, but because, you know, I love the work that I do, and I feel like it would be useful for other people to know more about the way that they think. I think that the more you understand about the way your mind works, the better off you are in life in general, because now you're not fighting against your mind, you're actually working with it. And so, you know, I view all of these activities I engage in as a helping behavior, not necessarily in the same way as, you know, pulling up to the street corner and handing someone who's hungry a sandwich.
Yeah. It's not so much in a sympathy kind of a way. It's more of a kind of maybe almost like collaboration, sort of a, and for the well-being of others and well-being of yourself too.
Well, and that last point is an important one. I mean, I think that to the extent that people end up with the motivation internally to be helpful, you know, there's a lot of other research on well-being that shows that in many ways, the more you give away of yourself in life, the more that you yourself end up being a happy person, right? It's you know, it is a paradox in some ways. You know, if you think of pure economic kinds of goods, in some sense, right, the more money you give away, you'd think, well, that makes you worse off. But the fact is that the more of yourself that you give away to other people, in fact, the happier you are, because it creates all sorts of positive relationships with other people. It creates all sorts of positive experiences. And I've written a lot about well-being and happiness and in my blog. And it turns out that if you look at what it is that makes you happy, it's experiences that make you happy. It's not stuff. You know, it's easy to have a house full of stuff and still be a relatively unhappy person. But if you collect experiences in your life, and experiences can be trips, right, vacations, but they can also be just positive interactions with people, right? Having a great dinner with someone, having a fantastic conversation is one of these experiences that you look back on, and it makes you happier. It's more fulfilling, and so the more that your motivation is to reach out to other people and to be helpful to them, right, which tends to engage other people in positive ways, ultimately that ends up closing the loop and having a really positive impact on yourself, on your own lifelong well-being. And so, you know, I mean, a lot of times, you know, you could think, well, okay, it's purely a sort of karma thing. If I do good things for other people, then maybe they'll turn around and do good things for me. And undoubtedly, society functions well that way. But at the same time, just the act of doing good things for other people has its own immediate benefit on you because of the experiences that it creates. And because when you're helpful, you do make other people happy. And we take on the goals of other people, and we take on the moods of other people. And so if you're doing things that make everyone else feel better about life, then you have put yourself in an environment. In fact, you've helped to create an environment in which there's a lot of well-being going on. And that's just a better place to be.
Yeah,
from a well-being standpoint.
There's kind of that sense of connection too, that when we're kind of when you're contributing to others' well-being, there's a sense of connection, and I think it's like the research about oxytocin, that there's something about having that sense of connection, that the body relaxes, and it kind of the fear level goes down, you know, the cortisol and the stress goes down, the oxytocin, you know, the calming chemicals in the body, neuropeptides, go up, and then there's kind of like this sense of well-being from the sense of connection as well.
That's right. Look, we're a social species. I mean, evolutionarily, in order for us to survive as a species, we have to work together. And so we have these great mechanisms that reinforce that sort of behavior. The more that we do work together, the more that we create these connections with other people around us, the more that in some sense our brains tell us you just did the right thing. And so when we engage with other people, we are in some ways fulfilling what it is we were designed to do. Whereas when we shut ourselves off from other people, when we refuse to be helpful to others, when we don't put ourselves out in that way, in some ways we are doing things that our brains are recognizing are not really in our long-term best interest. And so the way that we experience that is with negative feelings.
Well, one way I like to kind of explore this topic is through looking at metaphors, kind of for looking at kind of like the definition of empathy. And often empathy is described as the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes and looking through someone else's eyes. And for me, empathy is like a cornucopia because of that richness of experience that happens through empathy. So I'm wondering if you have like a metaphor of what empathy is like for you.
Well, I have always liked the metaphor of really being able to experience someone else's experience. If you think about the movies, right? You often get these first person point of view shots in the movie, and the arts in general have this wonderful ability to take your own life and to put it into that first person perspective that someone else has. And to me, that's an amazingly wonderful thing. I mean, it's funny, the arts, the humanities are kind of under attack these days. And I say this as a scientist, as someone who works at a university, we are told that STEM is the key to life at this point, right? Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. That's the thing that universities should be focusing on, that's the sort of thing that's going to make our lives better. And I don't want to minimize the importance of those disciplines. As a scientist, I think science is incredibly important. And I do think that we need to understand science better, and science is certainly under attack in certain quarters of this country right now. But at the same time, I would not want to overemphasize those disciplines at the expense of the arts and the humanities and literature, music, movies, because those are the drivers of empathy. And they are the drivers of empathy precisely because they give all of us the opportunity to be slotted into that first-person perspective of someone else or some other situation that is not our own life situation. And that the way we immerse ourselves in movies is the way that we should be immersing ourselves in other people's lives through all of these different lenses. So we can do that by having a great conversation with someone and suddenly seeing the world the way they do. But we can also do it for people who aren't there in the room with you right now through reading a great piece of literature and appreciating it, or through hearing music that someone has composed in order to convey a set of feelings, or by attending a play, or watching, looking at a painting, or any of these other elements of humanity that give us that opportunity to put ourselves right into the mask of someone else and to understand something about what they were experiencing at that moment. And that richness is part of what helps to create that connection.
Well, I think it's great that you mentioned the arts, because that's been my feeling as well. Just that the arts is such an important way of conveying and learning about empathy, and doing a bit of research about you, looking on your webpage and so forth, I came across a couple sentences here that you wrote, and one was, "Understand we learn from doing and not looking at the brain. Understand we learn from," yeah, that was it. It's like we learn by doing through the arts, and I thought it was kind of extending that. It's like we learn empathy from doing, not looking at the brain. So it's like, if we really want to deepen that empathy, I mean, I love the science of it, the mirror neurons, the oxytocin, all that kind of stuff I think is so helpful in kind of showing how that we're kind of really wired biologically, but to do empathy and to be empathic. But to really learn how to do it, it seems that the arts is kind of like the way to really learn.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that the more we learn about the science of the brain and the mind, what that teaches us is that we have these mechanisms, we have these capacities, but then the question is, how do you engage those? And I think the quote you pulled is absolutely right. It's the issue is that we learn everything by doing. You don't learn math by just watching someone do math. You do math. You engage with mathematics, and that's how it becomes real for you. And the same thing is true of our relationships with other people. We learn those not by just watching what happens, but by truly engaging. And so, there's a difference, even in watching a movie. There is a difference between watching a movie and engaging a movie. And there's a difference between talking to someone and engaging in a conversation. And so from the standpoint of empathy, it is when you engage someone in conversation and understand what they were trying to communicate to you that you learn empathy. And that's true in all of these media of communication that we have, whether it's having a real conversation with someone or reading a novel and really engaging with that text, or looking at a piece of artwork and engaging with the artwork and really trying to understand what's being conveyed. All of those are active processes. And really, when I wrote my book, Smart Thinking, a lot of what I was saying in that book was you have to engage with learning as well. If you really want to understand anything in the world, you have to engage in a process of teaching that, whether you teach it to someone else or whether you teach it to yourself. It's all about that level of engagement, and that's what allows you to really understand what's going on around you. And so it's as true in trying to learn something very technical as it is in just trying to understand what goes on with the people around you.
How did you get interested in empathy? I was just wondering about how you kind of started getting interested in it, and how your exploration of it has developed. Because in your book Smart Thinking, I actually did a search on empathy, and I didn't find the word in it. So
right. Well, it's so I mean, well, I will say, right, whenever you write anything, you got to stay focused, right? And so I tend to be interested in everything. And that's a great thing, great quality maybe in certain ways, but it can be a dangerous quality when you're trying to convey information to people, because you run the risk of saying too much and as a result not really allowing people to take home a point. But my feeling is, I had a very interesting journey in psychology, I guess. Because I started out as purely in cognitive science. Back as an undergraduate, I was an undergraduate at Brown, and I was in the cognitive science program there, and actually was mostly a computer science major. So at the time, I thought, what I really wanted to do was to try and make, intelligent machines. And then gradually, because the technology in the 80s wasn't really, I think, up to the task yet, I ended up switching and focusing a little more on human behavior, feeling like if we understood more about the way people do things, we might be able to make more intelligent machines. But of course, what happens is the more that you study people, the more that you realize that there's no fine line that divides the thinking parts of people, from the motivational parts of people, from the emotional parts of people, from the social parts of people. So there's a tendency when you start thinking about thinking to focus on individuals, right? That it's just how does a single person think? But then when you begin to look at what learning is all about, you realize we don't learn as individuals. We learn as a community. From the earliest ages, you watch parents with children. Children don't learn what a cow is all by themselves. Moms sit there with babies on their laps saying, oh, look at that, that's a cow. Cows say moo. Can you say moo? And so there is a social element to our thinking from the very beginning. And so as you begin to realize that, then the connection between people ends up becoming a crucial part of trying to understand even basic thought processes. And at that point, you have to worry about what are people's motivations, how do they make those kinds of connections to other people. And once you worry about that, now you have to begin to be concerned about feelings, emotions, because they play such a powerful role in the social interactions that people have that ultimately turn out to be crucial for learning and thinking and reasoning and all of those other processes. And so my path to this started from how could we make an intelligent machine, all the way to the level of recognizing that if we're ultimately going to understand thought, we have to understand the nature of these kinds of interactions with people. And then empathy becomes a central part of that, because that's how we learn. In a lot of ways, we learn from other people. And what learning from other people means is that you have to recognize that somebody else has something that you need, whether it's a piece of information or an understanding of the people around them, or just a way of living that turns out to be something that you want. And so, and then you look at the media that we use to do that. We learn a tremendous amount through our communications with other people. And our ability to communicate has this incredible influence on making people more similar to each other. So, the fascinating thing to me, and something I'm spending a lot of time thinking about right now, is that when two people engage in a conversation, they leave that conversation more similar to each other than when they started it, even if they think they disagree. Because in order to truly communicate, you have to synchronize the way that you're thinking and the way that you're feeling and the way that you're acting with someone else in that moment to communicate successfully. And so having real communication has this incredible power to make us more similar human beings. It eases that process of empathy. And in fact, in some ways, some of modern technology worries me that way. Because while something like this, like Skype, supports the ability for people who've never met to have a real conversation, a lot of our technology creates more distance. If you think about the stream of Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus and all of these other things, there's a lot of words that are passed and objects that are passed, and much less real communication.
Yeah, that's what I love about Skype. Is I got really excited when I kind of started using Skype. Is just the video part that I can see your face. I can see see you're shaking your head. You know what I mean? I wouldn't see that if I was just typing or hearing you. I'm hearing the quality of your voice, your body. So it's like more kind of information is being passed, and those mirror neurons are mirroring what's going on for you, and I think that the connection is deeper.
No, I think that's right, and there's lots of good evidence on that, right? That we really are designed for this kind of face-to-face, real-time conversation that allows us to have that connection in real time. And the further you step away from that, the less effective the communication is. You know, whether it's by doing it through writing or you know, even on the phone where you don't have the visual connection. All of those things dampen the effectiveness of communication. And in a lot of ways, they do that because they dampen some degree of the empathy that's involved in effective communication. Because we're good at, you know, if you're having a real conversation with someone and they're engaged in the conversation, you can begin to feel their engagement in the conversation, which you don't feel as strongly if you're on the phone, and you certainly don't feel as strongly if you are reading something that someone has written. And so the more that we can put ourselves in situations in which we really engage with other people, the more that we then engage in that practice of empathizing with others.
Well, I was really interested in your research because it seemed like you were looking at motivation, and it kind of ties in because I'm looking at how do we build a culture of empathy, right? How do we transform society to basically raise the level of empathy, you know, within society? And you know, we have a mechanism that's pretty big in society as competition, right? As kind of like this engine of action and motivation. You know, I have to strive to compete against you to get the prize, you know, and then I get the rewards and I feel good. And so I kind of see that what we have is kind of like a system. I use the metaphor of nuclear fission, right? It's like our politics is like that, right? We break things apart and it releases this energy. So we've got the Democrats and Republicans, you know, at each other's throats, and there's all this energy being released. But we also release, just like nuclear fission, is we release, you know, anxiety and fear and, you know, resentments and, you know, demeaning and all this, you know, toxic waste that kind of comes out of it. Whereas empathy is kind of like nuclear fusion, right? Is that it's bringing people together, and then there's an energy released from that coming together, and it doesn't have all the negative, you know, side effects and waste. So what I'm really looking at is kind of that's what really excited me about your article, because it seemed like you were getting towards the underlying kind of energy source within empathy. And if we're going to build a culture of empathy, we need to really be clear on how the empathy is going to release energy, how it's going to solve problems, how we're going to get things done, like which is the, you know, subtitle of your book. So I wonder if you had some kind of insights about that that I call it empathic action. It's like when we're working together in an empathic way, and you know, how do we kind of set that dynamics in place?
Well, in some ways, you know, the issue to me is how you classify yourself. And so in order to empathize with someone, because you really are taking this first-person perspective, and that's one of the reasons I like that kind of first-person point of view metaphor, is that in order to do that, you have to be on the same team as them. Because in order to really take on someone else's thoughts and feelings, for that moment, you have to classify yourself as if, as closely as possible, you are them. Right? In the movies, when you get that first-person point of view shot, what it's inviting you to do is to be that person for a moment. When we compete with other people, we're doing the opposite. What we're doing then is taking two people, putting them on opposite sides of a fence, and saying, look, you are different from me, and so I have to treat you as if there's a dividing wall there. There's me, there's you, and there's a wall, and I'm going to treat you as if you're on the other side of the wall. When I do that, I create this kind of competition, and now my motivation is very different. Now now the me that has to succeed is me, and that me does not include you because you're on the other side of the wall. And so whenever and anytime there's a competition, there have to be some number of sides, let's say 2 sides for the moment. And that creates, I think, all of the products that you were describing. There's a certain amount of anxiety that gets released. There's a certain amount of fear that you're going to lose. If I take your perspective, if I classify myself as being on your side, in fact, ever so briefly, if I classify myself as being you for the moment, now it's a very different energy, because now the me that wants to succeed is all of the people that I've now classified together. And so the more that people empathize with other folks, the more that what they're doing is classifying themselves and everyone else as a part of that same group. And now my goals are our goals. And my motivation is our motivation. And for me to succeed, we have to succeed. And so the more that people can be put into that other perspective and to truly understand what's going on with someone else, the more that by doing that, they are classifying themselves as if they were someone else and broadening the definition of the self in that moment.
Yes,
and that's in part, I think, why this motivation to help people intrinsically comes about when you empathize. Because what's happening is, when I've classified myself and you as being the same thing, helping you is in some ways helping myself.
Yeah, so it's kind of that notion of the common humanity, that somehow we're seeing kind of deeply into each other and seeing how similar we are and how we are connected as beings. And that creates that sense of sort of like a third person, like an us kind of consciousness of me as part of you, and back and forth, and then it's like, then by kind of adding to your welfare, I'm kind of adding to my sense of welfare. And it seems that on top of that, that there's some kind of biological quality of like the oxytocin, that we're kind of like biologically wired for wanting that sense of connection, and that it has some qualities of stress relief, giving us a warm feeling. So there's kind of like, there's that kind of quality. Because I look at why would we want to have a culture of empathy? It's like, what is the intention? Why would we have the intention to even do it? And I think the intention, one of them is just, well, it feels so good, and it works well, or something, you know what I mean? So.
Well, I think we're wired for both sides of this, right? We are wired for empathy, and we're wired for competition, right? We wouldn't have this very strong ability to compete if we didn't also have that wiring. But the issue, so then you ask, why do we have these mechanisms, right? Well, we have the mechanisms for empathy because we need to have a group that works together as an us to succeed. Look at us. Look at human beings. We don't have claws. We don't have sharp teeth. We don't have, put us in a room with almost any other animal and we lose, right? We succeed by working together, by engaging a set of common goals that allow us to do things as a group that we would never succeed in doing as individuals. And so we definitely have wiring that allows us to feel good by engaging a group of people that we classify as being us. And at the same time, we need to be able to survive in a competitive world. There are limited resources. There are other tribes. There are other animals. There are dangerous things out there. And so there are times where there is other. you know, in our evolutionary history, there are others who were in competition with us. And so we have both of these mechanisms. The modern world, though, is not at all like our evolutionary environment. The modern world is fairly easy. There are not the kinds of very real day-to-day dangers that someone might face if they were living in, you know, the savannah. You know, the most dangerous thing that might happen to most people is that a business deal might go bad, right? Or you might miss the bus, or, you know, a classmate might yell at you, right? I mean, that's what you know, all of these stress mechanisms that we developed to deal with very real losses are now engaged for the conceptual losses that we might suffer in a modern world that's very different from our evolutionary environment. And so that means that we need to recast the way that we think about gains and losses in this world. We are much better off in the world the way it's engaged, the way it's structured for us, the way we've structured our culture. We're much better off engaging with the people around us and finding those connections, because those mechanisms, those positive mechanisms, those approach motivational mechanisms, are the ones that are really best suited to the modern world that we've created. And so what's happened, I think, is that we have created a culture in which many people continue to engage these mechanisms of avoidance and loss and danger in a world that doesn't really call for those as often as we engage them. And so, you know, the value of creating that culture of empathy, of bringing more people into our group, classifying more people as ourselves, the value of that is we ultimately create motivational states for ourselves that are much better suited to the world we actually live in.
So what kind of ideas do you have about how do we create that world? Like, how do we go from where we are? Because, I mean, if you look at the politics, I mean, it looks kind of like hopeless. And I talk to people, and it's like, oh, it's hopeless. And, you know, it's like, how do we get from here to, you know, raising that level of empathy?
Well, one of the things that we have to do is get people out in the world again. So, you know, I've thought a lot about this. So we about a year and almost 2 years ago now, we had a guy who flew an airplane, a little private plane, into an office building in Austin. And it turned out to be an office building that housed the IRS. And if you looked at his writing that he did in the months before he did this, he had written extensively about his dissatisfaction with the government and how it shouldn't be collecting taxes. And at the same time, he was reading lots of websites by people who agreed with that position, and he was posting on websites that agreed with that position. And what he did essentially was to use the internet, to use modern technology to surround himself only with people who believed exactly the way that he did. This is very different from even what this country was like 50 years ago. You know, in the 1960s, in the 1950s, you couldn't only surround yourself with people who believed the way you did. There were 3 television networks, maybe a half dozen or a dozen radio stations in the town that you were living in. There were, you weren't able at the drop of a hat to fly across the country. You had to live in your community. And your community was going to have a diverse set of opinions about the way that the world worked. And you were going to have to hear people's opinions, even when those opinions differed from your own, and you were going to have to engage with those opinions in some way. What we've done over the last 50 years is to make it easier and easier to hear only what you want to hear. There are 300 television stations, There is an unlimited number of radio stations. There is a website for every political stripe. There are, no one has to engage people who disagree with them. And if you never engage someone who holds an opinion different from your own, you can never empathize with them. Because a real conversation requires, if you say something to me that I utterly disagree with, in order for me to really say something back to you, I first have to understand what it is that drove you to tell me that in the first place. Which means for that moment in the conversation, I have to be you. And that's why, even if we end up disagreeing at the end of a conversation, we're more similar at the end of it, because I had to walk through your logic. I had to walk through your concepts in order to engage you in a conversation. And that creates empathy for an opposing position over time. Because over time, I can understand how you arrived at the conclusion you did, even if I disagree with it. And that allows us to understand each other more effectively. But we don't do that anymore. We surround ourselves with people who believe the way that we do. We create Facebook pages that are filled with quote, friends who are going to post things that look like the things that we believe in. And we're going to read newspapers online that have the same political spin that we would like to put on things. And you can, depending on your political persuasion, you can watch MSNBC or you can watch Fox News and hear the spin that you want to hear in the news. And at no point do you end up engaging something that truly differs from how you want to see the world. If we want to create a real culture of empathy, we got to stop that. People have to get together again and have real conversations and be forced on a daily basis to try to figure out how in the world some smart person could actually believe something fundamentally different from what we believe. Because if we're on the same side of a conversation, then we have to treat the person we're talking to as if they really are a smart person, as smart as we are, because we're projecting ourselves into them. And we don't do that. And so by not engaging with people, it's easier to create that wall between them again and now say, well, they believe that because they're an idiot, because they're just misguided, without ever really engaging the opinions that differ from our own. And until we start doing that regularly, we're simply not going to have a more civil culture.
Yeah, so over time now, the society's become more fragmented and people living in their own kind of communities, even gated communities, right? Where people are locked off from each other and divided from each other. So it's like, how do we get people from different walks of life to get together again in kind of a personal way, and that's going to take some kind of social structuring, like somehow, society can be, I mean, the schools do it, but even then the schools are becoming kind of, segregated in a way with rich and poor and so forth. So, I mean, it's like there's real kind of nuts and bolts of how to, how do you bring people together like that? I mean, it's like what needs to be done, but there's going to need to be some nuts and bolts ways of doing that.
And maybe one step towards that is that the more that we understand of what the value of empathy is, from a mechanistic standpoint, then that provides us with a reason to want to create these kinds of interactions. So, we need, we have to then engineer social diversity because of the value that it ends up having on the psychology of people within that culture. And I think that then we have to be willing to put people into potentially uncomfortable situations. So as valuable as empathy can be in certain ways, that is, it It can be a wonderful, oxytocin releasing experience to connect with someone else. Getting into a political argument with someone you disagree with is not fun. It is a lot more fun to talk to people who agree with you. And so we have to create environments in which it is safe to have a conversation, and in which we let people understand that there is long-term value to those conversations, even if they are sometimes less comfortable in the moment. The reason that people gravitate towards media outlets who fundamentally agree with them in their orientation is because it feels better. It's always more fun to talk to somebody who already thinks everything you think.
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting because I've been to the Tea Party rallies, interviewing people about empathy, been to the Occupy rallies, interviewing, to demonstrations, to the Republican state convention here and the Democratic state convention. And then at the rallies, it was, I would ask them about it, about empathy, and then about, the other side. And they'd say, they're not listening to us. And then I'd go to the other side, they're not listening to us. And there's this whole thing about everybody feels that the other side's not listening, and they got to yell louder and louder. And then, it's like, yeah, we're going to need some kind of, I guess first we got to have like the vision of a culture of empathy is kind of what I'm thinking, is you have to see, like you're saying, the value of it, that this is important, and this is, it has, all the values that come out of it. And then, we're going to have to look at how do we create those social structures that bring people together. I've kind of imagined what I call empathy cafes. So, like small group discussions. So instead of these situations where, the politicians go and they talk to the room full of people, is you break it up into small tables using maybe like the World Cafe, 4 people to a table, where people actually, talk about what's important to them, and kind of get beyond, fighting over the issues, but talk about their values and kind of the deeper things in their life. So it's kind of like one mechanism.
I think that's right. And to get back to this idea of communication, that's really the core of this. It's all about having real communication among people, not just someone saying something over the heads of everyone, but actually having people engage with each other. And part of the empathy may come from not the direct discussion about political issues that might divide a group, but when you have a conversation with someone, look, I have neighbors whose political views differ from my own, and yet we have lots of common ground. If you speak to someone and they're a parent or a pet owner or whatever it is that has some commonality with you, you begin to find those points in which you're not really so different from everyone else. And that provides an entry into understanding the issues on which you might disagree more strongly. But without having those kinds of conversations, you never find the points of commonality, because you're so focused on the thing you disagree about. When when people gather at a Tea Party rally, or when they gather at an Occupy rally, they have gathered because of a specific issue that divides them from other people on that issue. But are they all really so different on most of the other issues of life? Not necessarily. And I find this. I play music. I'm a saxophone player. I play Sunday nights in a blues band. And the music community is a diverse community with respect to, the political spectrum, with respect to the economic spectrum, and you get together with this group of people because they have a common interest in music, and that forms a basis for having all kinds of other discussions. some of which are, end up being things that you do disagree about. But you're able to have that discussion in part because you are part of the same team with respect to this other set of issues. And so getting people together in groups where they start by recognizing some common element of humanity and build from there is in a lot of ways a crucial part to developing this more empathic culture.
Yeah, well, maybe the empathy itself could be the commonality, to say, hey, we all have this commonality of empathy. Let's get together and try to deepen it and explore it and find ways of promoting it, fostering it.
Yeah, I think you have to find something that people are open to, right? And that's why I think there's a lot of different potential communities there. Some people, I think, empathy will resonate to them. Yeah, that's something we need to do. I always worry that some people will say, I don't know, that empathy thing's just not for me. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so what can we find for that person that provides that point of common ground that opens them to that empathic experience without necessarily putting empathy front and center for them? So I think we always need to converge on these things.
It's kind of meet people where they're at. Kind of.
Yeah.
So where do you see your work progressing now? Where is your kind of research and interests going with this?
One of the things that I'm really interested in right now is the concept of a neighborhood. So if you think about where the most persuasive relationships that we have in our life come from, and the deepest relationships, many of them come from our neighborhoods. So we live in a world these days, a world of strangers, people we don't know very well. There are strangers who are trying to sell you things, right? That's what most modern advertising is about. There are strangers who are trying to convince you how you should live your life. And that's on the one side. On the extreme other side, we have family. Family, though, is ultimately accepting of who you are no matter who you are, which is wonderful. It's important to have family. It's important to have some place you can go where someone is going to accept you for all of your flaws, and that's great. But in terms of trying to move forward culturally, in order to try and create the culture that we want to be a part of, we can neither do that by treating everyone as a stranger, nor can we do that by accepting everything that someone has really done, accepting all the aspects of who someone is. What we really need to do is to create these closer-knit communities, the way that we have in a good neighborhood. And I'm very interested in understanding what are the elements of that. What happens when you engage with the people who are your neighbors, whether they're physically your neighbors or just socially your neighbors through the various channels you have for communicating? How does that communication influence the way that you think? How does it influence your ability to engage with the world in a positive way? Whether that's socially in a positive way to create positive social change, or frankly, whether that's to create more success for people in a business environment, right? I mean, all of these things ought to be communities. 50 years ago, if you got sick, you went to the local mom and pop pharmacy at the in your neighborhood, and your pharmacist knew who you were and talked to you and gave you recommendations, and you listened to those and you changed the way you did things because you had this person in your community who knew you and you knew them, and there was a bond. And now, you go to your local CVS, you have no idea who these people are, they have no idea who you are, and the relationship is completely different. Well, how can you create positive relationships that may have business implications, they may have societal implications, in the world the way it is now, with the channels of communication that are open to us? And that's something that we're actively exploring right now, and hopefully I'll have more to say about that, in the coming years.
Okay, well, this has been great hearing about all these, your experiences and insights about the nature of empathy, and it's really been fascinating. And I hope we can kind of continue the dialogue. We're doing panel discussions too around this, and if you know other people that would like to share ideas and about the nature of empathy and how we can really build a culture of empathy. So. Art, I want to thank you so much for taking this hour to, share your insights. And you've got the book Smart Thinking, and looks like a great book too. And I hope you keep writing more about empathy in it too, more of those articles on.
Well, that's the plan, and I appreciate your reaching out. It's always fun to meet people with common interests, and to really try to take all this kind of work and turn it into something that can actually have an impact on what people are doing in the world. So I enjoy the work you're doing, and I hope it continues to have success.
Okay, thank you. So, and have a good day, the rest of the day there in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, well, if you ever make it back down to Austin to see your alma mater, let me know.
Oh, I definitely will visit you. That would be great to have someone there to visit. Kind of lost contact. So, okay, well, I will keep in contact and talk to you again soon. Thanks for sharing your time with us.
Excellent. Take care.
Okay, bye, Art.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.